If you're colorblind and you're just starting out on your quilting journey, then things might be feeling a little bit overwhelming. With all the things that you have to learn when it comes to quilting, and then we put color on top of that, it's very easy to get overwhelmed quickly. But with a few simple tips and strategies, I want to show you how to take the stress out of colorblind quilting and make things nice and easy. So stick around to find out more. Hi, my name's Tom and I am the Colorblind Quilter, and I am on a journey to become a better quilter, and I'm sharing my experiences with you along the way. When I first started quilting, I dived in straight away without really knowing what I was doing. And then I was trying to master my quarter inch seam, my pressing technique and quilting and everything, and then suddenly I realised, what about colour? My first quilt was quite the mix of colours. I had bought a fat quarter bundle of pastel colours that were great for a baby quilt and had thrown them together without any knowledge of colour theory or colour placement in quilt. And then add to the fact that I couldn't actually see the difference between half of the colours in the fat quarter bundle, and it was a recipe for a mess. Fast forward 12 years later and I've developed coping mechanisms and strategies that help me to deal with being colourblind, keeps the stress out of it, and it helps me to stay organised so that I can just enjoy creating my quilt. Now I do have a playlist of videos about what it's like to be a colourblind quilter, and if you want to watch any of those videos, I'll put a link in the corner so you can see them. So let's dive straight into the tips, and make sure you stick around to the end because I have a free bonus that's really going to help you get started with colour. So when my fabric arrives from the online shop, it's all beautifully labelled telling me what colour it is so that I know what it is. I then get myself a Sharpie marker and I write in that selvage what the colour is, and I write the whole way along the length of the piece of fabric so that even as I cut it up I still have indicators on the remaining fabric of what the colour is. I then take masking tape and I write the name of the colour and I put it on all the bits, especially as I get down to scrap, or I cut a strip and I only use half of it and then I'm left with half a strip. I just pop a little bit of painter's tape on there so that I know what colour it is, because they often will not have the selvage on it because we've trimmed it off for whatever we're making. Another thing I do is that once I'm finished with a piece of fabric, if it's a substantial piece of fabric and I'm putting it back into my stash, I'll get a little square post-it note, I'll write the colour on it, and then I actually will pin it to the fabric. And this makes sure that even if the masking tape falls off, I've still got something physically on the fabric that says this is Kona Clementine. Another thing that I like to do is that once they're all labelled before I start cutting anything, I like to take myself a reference picture. Having that there untouched is really helpful and has saved me quite a few times when I've been struggling. But no matter what you do, just make sure that everything is well labelled clearly so that you can understand what it is once you finish with your project. I like project sheets, and this is nothing new, I'm not reinventing the wheel here, but I create a project sheet for every quilt that I make. Take the pattern, I look at what the fabric requirements are, if they're lettered or they're numbered, and I write them on a little sheet, and then I write the name of the colour that I'm using, and then underneath that I will then put little squares of the fabric glued to the paper, and I will write the name of it and the letter or the number that corresponds to the pattern. I'll also take the opportunity to write what the backing is, what the binding is, and any other information that I need to know, and I use that as my reference throughout the project. And that's also another great fail-safe, because if the masking tape in my pinned piece of fabric happens to fall off, I can go and get my project sheet and I can look at the fabric and I can see, right, that's fabric B, which is Clementine. It's another kind of way for me to make sure that I know what the fabric is. Working in dark conditions makes it harder to differentiate between two colours. I find when I'm working in my quilting room and I don't have all the lights on, I can make mistakes and put the wrong fabrics in the wrong order, and I have done this before on quilt. As you can see in the picture, the darkest blue should be on the outside, it shouldn't be second in. And this was because I didn't have enough lights on, so I couldn't see that there was two different shades of blue there. So when you're in your studio, try and get the brightest lights that you can. Very easy to get LED desk lamps that are capable of doing daylight, and that means that it simulates what it's like outside in a bright day, and it makes it much clearer to see the fabrics. I have a couple of lights that I use in my studio. I have one that's overhead that's nice and bright. I have an LED desk lamp on my desk as well, and then I also have an LED video light that I use, and that really can cast a lot of bright light, and because it's small and portable, I can pick it up and really shine it down close onto fabric so I can get a really good bright light. There are lots of apps out there that can help to simulate the colours for our eyes, and my favourite one is ColourBlind Pal. What these do is that they're capable of taking a live feed from your camera and then converting it so that your eyes can see the colours a little bit clearer. Some of the features in some of the apps as well that's really helpful is that it can identify the colour that you're pointing the camera at, and on screen it will say this is orange, this is blue. It's not always 100% accurate, I've found though, and sometimes I think it depends on how bright the lighting in your room is. However, it's a great starting point to give you an idea of the general colour. These are a little expensive to buy, but if you can get one, they are a great tool to have in your studio. And the reason I like it is because I can put it under my bright lights and I can actually see the colors and I can plan what I want to do using real representations of the fabric. So shade cards are really helpful for you to see with your eyes and not a computer representation of the actual color, or as close to real representations as they can be, because when manufacturers make fabrics, there are always going to be slight variations in the fabric from batch to batch. Now, I first thought colour theory was so scary, partly because I looked at the colour wheel and couldn't tell what half the colours were, and so I was like, I can't do this, not for me. But I've come to realise that actually, with a bit of help and with a bit of labelling, colour theory is not as scary looking at that wheel. So my advice would be learn some basic colour theory. You do not need to become an expert in colour theory, but knowing the basics will certainly help you out. And it will help you to start planning what colours go with what, and how you can vary patterns and try different colour zones and different colour ways to expand your horizons with colour. There are lots of great places out there to learn about colour theory, and I am working on my own video about colour theory, but I'll leave the link in the description to a great video that will explain the basics to you in under 10 minutes. It's very easy when we're quilting, we get carried away, we get over ambitious, and sometimes we take on projects that are too big for us. And the same comes to colour and quilts. If you're not that experienced, don't necessarily rush and try and do the most complicated quilt that you can. Take that into account when you're making your quilt. If it's a really easy to construct quilt, then maybe go a little bit more complicated and try a few more colours in the mix. If it's a really complicated pattern and you have to concentrate more on the construction and the techniques required, then perhaps just simplify the colours a little bit so you're not struggling with what colour is what and where it goes. You may want to initially limit the fabrics that you work with, perhaps sticking with solid fabrics only. I myself personally prefer to only work with solid fabrics. I find a lot of pattern fabrics difficult to deal with. If they rely on darker colours to form shades to give effects or outlines, I find that very difficult to work with, and indeed it can be tiring on my eyes. So I like to stick with solids, or I like to stick with very low volume prints. They're easier to work with because it's still only really one colour. They may be like a dark colour with a white shade on top, or it may be a dark fabric with a white spot. Still very simple, very easy to work with. If you're more comfortable, by all means go for it, do what you like, but just have a look at the fabrics and just try and visualize what it's going to be like when it's cut up and you have to put things together and recognize what goes where. If it fills you with dread or it's making you stressed, then I would suggest perhaps using a fabric that's a little simpler, like a solid. One thing that I do actually like is monochromatic colour scheme, and these are where you take a colour like blue for example, and then you work with different shades of blue throughout that quilt. Now that might sound to some people, that's a bit boring, but actually they can be beautiful and be very, very impressive for the end result. So perhaps try that, and that can actually be a great exercise for you to develop your colour skills because you're working in different shades of the same colour. So maybe pick a colour that you're confident with. So for example, I may pick orange, and I might look down the shade values of a fabric line like Kona solids and look at all the different yellows and pick 4 or 5 of them from darker to lighter, and then work with the placement of them to create my fabric pool. And even if you're not comfortable with colours, maybe just try black and white or grey, and they can be a lot of fun playing with the placement of the colours and the order that they're in, and it can produce beautiful, stunning end results. If you're making a quilt for somebody else, which you probably will be at some point, because let's face it, there's only so much space in our houses for our own quilt. If you're a little bit unsure of how to pick colours for them, sometimes the best thing to do is to just ask. Or you can look at the person's decor and say, right, I'm making a quilt for their living room, and their living room is decorated in blue, so I'm going to work on a blue colour scheme for them. If it's a surprise, then you might have to get a little bit more creative and maybe look at their Instagram, look at their Facebook, clothes they wear, ask family and friends what colours they like and figure something out. But if you can ask them, it can be a fun part of the process, having your friend or the person you're making for involved, going to the fabric shop together and picking fabric. It can be a lot of fun to involve them in the process. When it comes to colour, what one person loves, another person may completely hate. And it just comes down to personal taste and what people like. And everybody's tastes and preferences are completely different. I used to be so hung up on the perfect colour scheme, the perfect colour palette. And then I started to realise, well, it doesn't matter. It can be textbook perfect. And somebody might come along and go, I don't like that, that's horrible. What are you going to do? I like it, they don't like it, so it's okay, that's fine. So try and have fun, experiment, try new things. If you love it, who cares? I think it's a great idea to build a range of colour palettes that are tried and tested, that you're comfortable using and that you know work. And I find this especially helpful if I need to make a quilt quickly. When that happens, I go to my little library of colour palettes that I've used and that I've tested and that work, and I just go from there. Now, I alluded at the start of this video that I had something for you that may help you to get started with your colours, and that's a free download of colour palette. Now, these are colour palettes that I have developed with other ColourBlind quilters. Now, you'll find all of this in the free download, and you can get that in the description below. They're all based on a dominant colour, and you'll find options for 2 colours and then options for 5 colours. And then you'll find at the back of it there's some example quilts that I have coloured using pre-quilt and these colour palettes. And that's to give you an idea of what they look like. And I hope you find that great resource. It's helpful to give you some starting points for colour palettes that you can use. So those were my 11 tips on quilting for colourblind people. Label all your fabric. Make a project sheet with swatches of fabric that you can refer to now and at a later time. Work in bright light in your studio. Use apps that can help to show you what the colours are, and they can help to correct the colours. Have shade cards so you can see real life representations of fabric. Learn basic colour theory to give you a starting point. Pick the colour palettes that you're going to use based on the complexity of a project. Easier projects, more colours. Harder projects, simpler colours. Try monochromatic colour schemes. Embrace colour. If you love it, then who cares? Don't let anybody tell you that the colours are right or wrong. And finally, get my free download to give you some starting points and colour palettes that can be helpful. So that was our video today. I hope you liked it, and I hope that you found it useful. Have you got some tips that I've maybe missed out? Leave a comment below and share them so that everybody else who's colourblind can benefit from your experience. If you've liked this video, please do take a moment to give it a thumbs up. And why not subscribe and click the bell so you get notified when I release new videos. Don't forget to get the free download in the description box below and check out the resources that I've mentioned. If you're looking for me, you will find me on Facebook, Instagram and Pinterest at The ColourBlind Quilter, or my website, thecolorblindquilter.com. So until next time, take care.